All right, this is a very irregular, unscheduled live stream with my guest, Peter Tippett. Who is he? Why is he on a live stream of the Geneva Learning Foundation? Well, we met in, networking at TechCrunch Disrupt a few days ago, and he says he's on a mission to empower educators to do what they are passionate about and be rewarded. So really thought it'd be interesting to have a chat with him. He's in Australia, so he couldn't come in to our monthly dialogue, which happens on Sunday evenings in Geneva, Switzerland. That's the story. In a few seconds, we'll be chatting with Peter Tippett. Stay tuned. The applause is because we're doing an unscheduled, disruptive live stream with Peter Tippett, my guest. He says he is on a mission to empower educators to do what they are passionate about and be rewarded. We're going to try to understand what that actually means and have a chat with him about his leadership journey. This is really intended as part of the Geneva Learning Foundation's dialogue on learning and leadership. So, Peter, first of all, welcome. How are you doing? Tell us what time it is. And I think you have someone very special next to you.
Yeah, it's about 7:30 in the evening for me, and behind me is my doggy, who's a 28-kilo Kelpie cross that loves going for a walk.
All right.
And gets me out of the house.
All right, so we want to talk about your leadership journey as part of the dialogue for learning and leadership. Why are you on a mission to empower educators, and how does somebody choose that as their mission?
Basically, COVID opened a door which I didn't anticipate. I've done teaching, but I've been a technologist all my life, and I grew up in a family business of doing stuff that was different. But fun of being a surf lifesaver, teaching people how to save lives and assessing them taught me a lot. But in COVID, the world changed, and one of my clients I've been working with and teaching and mentoring rang me up and says, my business has just been turned over. Help me. And he runs a yoga business, and I just fell into it. And we basically had an opportunity to reset a whole industry. And that's been an interesting learning. And I've done this a few times of resetting different industries. With live TV engagement, legal software and that. But a lot of the stuff have been about helping people and educating them and taking them to the next level. And that's my role in life, is to help people. And that comes back from my core background, where I grew up in South Auckland in New Zealand, where your word was your bond or you lost your kneecaps.
Right,
a harsh world.
Yeah. And at the Geneva Learning Foundation, we've worked a lot. We were just chatting about this before we went live with first responders. And so we know there's a particular leadership culture when, a leadership failure means that somebody might die, and the very strong bonds around solidarity and as well as leadership. So in the context of the Geneva Learning Foundation's dialogue for learning and leadership, question number one is, do you see yourself as a leader?
I see me more as a coach and empowering people. Leadership to me is you're a servant. And it's like when people give me their organizational charts and they have the CEO at the top, I turn it upside down and say, well, your job is to help all them exceed their expectations. And that's something that has to be inherent. It's not about me, it's about them, it's about we. And to me, that's what leadership's about. You have a vision, you empower people, you exude that passion to them, and you've heard me talk about this before. and they come along with the journey, but you let them drive it. And that's the hardest thing about being a leader. You're not in control.
But
You're the guide.
before we dive in further on the so on the sort of philosophy and ethics of your experience of leadership, tell us exactly what you did in response to the pandemic. How did you help those folks whose businesses were dependent on convening people in a shared physical space? Who were they, and what have you done for them? What have you been able to do with them?
Well, basically, with the industry, yoga teachers and Pilates and fitness couldn't teach anymore. They couldn't do it physically. And my co-founder on this owned 7 studios, and suddenly he went from earning $750,000 a month to zero. But he was more concerned about helping his teachers, helping them to continue to earn, because suddenly he couldn't afford to pay them. And we developed online systems so they could actually connect with their students. And we saw we can create a global community of where they support each other, and ultimately they will own the community, and we're just there as the custodians, and we act as the stewards on how it runs. So they will benefit, and we're already seeing teachers are earning 3 to 4 times on the online platform to what they earn physically. But it's not about being their full-time job. It's about helping them to have another level of income to allow them to realise what they're passionate about. And the students didn't allow them to have their passion. Online allows them to have that passion.
Yeah, what's fascinating there is we're talking about digital transformation. So how people go from, sort of adapt and change in response to what digital technologies, digital culture enables. Fascinating thing for me is the technology can be there, but until people change their behavior, their ways of thinking, their mindset, their culture, how does a yoga teacher, you're focused on your body, on the bodies of others, on that spiritual connection. What was the response? How did you, tell us, can you think of one time when you spoke with a yoga teacher and who sort of went over that tipping point of realizing that maybe he or she wouldn't be losing everything, by going digital? How does that work?
Well, we had one teacher, she's excelling. She's just a normal teacher. She's from Ireland, lives out here. When she went online, she suddenly had a lot of island students that couldn't work with her before, were suddenly doing her classes and actually contributing to her to develop. And now that we're moving into a whole new phase where people, like we've just asked a whole lot of students, would they go back to studio only? And they will go, no, I'm going to do online because convenience. I'll mix both of them and they'll become hybrid. And then we've been developing ideas of how to help them to learn and connect online. And it's not using the Zoom model like video conferencing. It's actually taking a new idea, which is actually old idea. And we all experience at primary school when the teacher walk around and look over our shoulder and correct us. And we've been developing a digital equivalent of that. So the teacher can play a video of what you need to do, and then they can watch you and talk to you directly and say, hey, tighten that up, tighten that stomach up, lift that leg a little bit, you're wobbling, and give direct feedback wherever you are in the world, which is actually starting to bring some of the analog model into the digital world. And you got to think about what it's going to be like in 3 to 4 years' time, where digital is a lot closer to analog. And that's a big change.
Tell me more about this idea of bringing analog into the digital world. Aren't they mutually exclusive?
Well, the thing is about teaching is if you've got somebody observing you when you're learning something and giving you feedback, you do so much better. The question is, we've all learned over COVID, we can actually do it virtually. We can do it through video conferencing like we're doing right now. Would I've ever been on something like this pre-COVID? Never. COVID's changed our habits and assumptions. And you've got to remember, video conferencing has been back from the 90s. I did research in this area back in 2001 in video conferencing. And my team won an award with Doctors Without Borders on it. It's been here for a long time, but COVID's just made us all actually become experimenters, try things. Don't be afraid. because we wanted to do things, to connect and do this. And that's what COVID in some ways has been great, because it's actually made us all go, we've lost the fear of trying new things because we've had no choice. And that's going to continue, because we're now learned we can try new things and not have that fear. It's a strange world in that way.
Peter, what I like is that you talk about the economics. You said some of these teachers, actually made more money by teaching online, reach more people, reach more customers. I would love to talk about business models in a little bit, because we've seen sort of the social media business models, Facebook and YouTube and others, for content creators, for people who share their culture, share their abilities, share their talent and what they do. Would love to hear you on that. But before we delve into that, I have a crazy idea, which comes from my experience facilitating these large meetings with hundreds, in some cases thousands of participants. And to me, that sense of connectedness in the digital space with people from all over the world, and I can feel their presence. And I thought, surely within a couple of 100 years, maybe even before, there will be like entire religious systems, new religions arising from people, from the kind of spiritual experience that you can have online. Agree or disagree? What are your thoughts on that? Have you experienced the same thing?
I see, basically, it's not 100 years. You're talking 10, 20 years. And you've got to think, the iPhone that we take for granted is not even 12 years old. The technology is accelerating, but also you've now got a generation that only knows the phone. They don't know computers. They've never been through the pain we've all had.
Yeah.
Older generation. And they're going to accelerate this change and the acceptance. Like, who would have thought esports to the level it is now?
Right.
I saw it back in 2013 with the software I was building back then. Now it's a profession. Who would have thought that 10 years ago?
Yep.
So where are we going to be in 10 years? We can't assume. We just have to experience.
So I want to ask you now about business models, and you pointed to that teacher who, financially, it's advantageous for him or her to teach online as opposed to keep doing the same old thing in a physical space. And we've seen the digitalization of many businesses, the emergence of platform businesses. What's your take on those dynamics, and especially with people who create things and people who teach? What do you think this new economy represents, and what are some of the complexities? Is it just beyond the opportunity to make more money?
Okay, so the interesting thing that's going on right now is, up until now, the influence is about me. What can I do? And I connect with 10 million people, and what can I get out of it? What's changing now is what's called the we. It's what can we do for each other. So now we're moving more into the old village model, and that's coming about with us moving out of the cities, deurbanization, attitudes, and more conscious of climate change and everything else going around us, that we now realize we're part of a community and we need to help that community. It's not about an I anymore. And that's one of the changes. Growing up in New Zealand with the Maori culture around me, that was about we and helping each other. There was no such thing as an I. Where if you go to America, it's about the freedoms for me, not for everybody else. And I think this is the change that's going to happen, is we're going to go back to our old community ideas of helping each other. And who taps into that and grows that will help it. And that's part of how we're designing our business. We're using the blockchain technology. It allows everybody to engage because it's part of Web 3.0. It's a collaboration model. It's been 10 years in development of collaboration and building how everybody's built it. All we've seen is one effect of that is the Bitcoin stuff that we all talk about. But there's a whole lot of fundamentals underneath that and it's built on trust. And it's electronic trust instead of people trust. And that's how the world, trust is the key that drives us. That's what's burnt me. That's what inherently in my DNA is trusting people. It's cost me, but other times it's made me do things and experience things I could never do in a normal way. So it's a very different world now.
So Patreon's Chief Executive Officer, Jack Conte, talks about, this is an interview with The Verge on why creators can't depend on platforms. And he positions Patreon as a different kind of platform, and actually goes back, says things like, for thousands of years, the way the arts were funded globally was wealthy people or institutions were like, I enjoy what you make, here's a bag of coins, go make some more of that stuff, is patronage. With the businesses such as the yoga studio, which have historically been local and community based, connected to something bigger, on a global level. But what would be the sort of parallel analysis? Is there a similar analysis to what this shift means and why? Yes, some solutions might be better than others for people who run those kinds of businesses and practice and believe in their arts.
Well, I see, like, the yoga studios have become, over the last 20 years, owned by investors. It's become very capitalized, investor-driven, and forced on them by the rental markets of property and all that. And so it's become a commercial activity. What we can do now is actually allow the teachers to actually teach what they care about. We're in a studio. The studio was commercial, so they control what the teachers taught, when they taught, and the locations, because it was all about getting people in the doors. Suddenly now, it's not about getting people in the doors. It's about how do I connect with people around the world who care about what I do. And that doesn't apply just to yoga. It applies to anybody in the arts or passionate or creative. There are people out there who like what you do and want to contribute. Now, Pantheon has helped to start that. But what we believe is the community should own it. And that's part of what blockchain with the distributed autonomous organization gives you the ability to do. And the cryptocurrency and the distributed finance model allows people to support each other around the world and not be restricted by the banking system and the Wall Streets of this world. So suddenly the world is, we're able to create what's called digital countries that support each other. It's not based on location. It's actually based on who we are and what we care about. And we could join 5 different countries that are digital. Where at the moment, where I live in Australia, I am restricted by my location. In a digital world, I'm not. And that's a different thought process.
Very interesting. I'd like to go back to the leadership question and bring this brief chat to a close. There's stuff I can tell we could go on for several hours, but the constraint of time remains, even if location is out the window. Yeah. So about leadership, when and how did you realize the significance of the leadership question, of thinking what it means to lead, to be led, to what the relationship between people who co-create leadership together? When did you realize that was significant in your own work and in your life?
I went through 2 levels of it. One was I was 17, my parents' business, when they bought a computerized lathe into New Zealand. And here's an 18-year-old telling the 40-year-olds how to do the job. Right. So I had to learn how to manage that. So it taught me one thing. But the real time I learned was actually managing volunteers as a lifesaver on Bondi Beach. Everybody's passionate about protecting people's lives. And Bondi Beach is a real interesting place to be. You're saving lives every day. And you're volunteers, but you're passionate. And to manage volunteers, there's one fundamental thing. You say thank you. It's not about do. You trust them to do the job. And 95% of the time, you're all on the same path. 4% of the time, you're a bit more of a director. And 1% of the time, you're a dictator when things really go bad and you've got lives at risk. and you just got to tell people to go and do things.
Yeah.
And that taught me leadership, because managing volunteers, they can just say, I'm not interested, and walk off the door.
Exactly. Yeah. So who or what helped you come to that consciousness? Who or what helped you learn that?
I had a few people which were old lifesavers type thing, because lifesavers are funding. It's strange because you've got people from all ages, from 13-year-olds just being on the beach saving people to 80-year-olds who are doing the same thing, politicians to unemployed, but you're all the same, because all you're wearing is a pair of Speedos or a cozy or bikini. That's all you've got on. So you don't know people's backgrounds. So it's about you, which is really interesting. So you're thinking in a very different way of how people work. So you have to be respectful of people, polite, accepting, understand culture. But at the end of the day, you're there all for one purpose, and we're all doers. If somebody's in trouble, we'll go and check them. If they're not in trouble, we go, okay, we just walk back. But at the end of the day, if we've got to save them, we save them.
So what would be, can you think of an incident in your own, in your own practice that illustrates that view of leadership? Probably a time on Bondi Beach, but maybe not.
It's like what I'm going through right now with some of my staff with the new business. Is they've never dealt with startups where you're walking on sand. They've come from worlds where you knew what you're doing and where you were going.
Right.
And my job is actually to plant the seeds and water those seeds in them. And I just had a brilliant message from one of them this afternoon when she's just gone, I now click. I now understand where we're going for the first time, and understands that the world we're in is changing so fast. Now she understands that she's a lifetime learner, and building a startup is learning just in time. Where she came from, well, you need to be fully studied, qualified, and know everything. Now it's like you learn as you go.
Right.
And that's my job. Plant the seeds, water the seed, and see it germinate. And that's the most pleasure of being a leader.
And so how do you think about leadership in the digital age? What do you think is different now with the sort of hyper-connected world, but also the very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we live in? What is different about leadership? Is there anything? If so, what is it?
It's still about vision, and it's still about your actions is everything. Your words are still not valued. It's about what you do and how you act as how people see you. And that's a hard thing, because that means you have to be authentic. You can't use marketing anymore. It's a very different world in that way. The younger generation sees straight through all marketing. They see where you're unauthentic. So to be a leader now, you've actually got to speak without a filter on what you say. It has to come from you, not where you're thinking, what can I say politically correct, what I can say. It's just got to be how you think and do. And I think that's the hardest thing with leadership nowadays, is you just got to live and breathe it. You can't fake it anymore. And that's a big difference.
Fascinating. Thank you, Peter Tippett, on a mission to empower educators to do what they're passionate about and be rewarded. I realize we've barely scratched the surface, but we're going to end here, and we'll be listening at the end of this month. We'll be going to our key contributors for the Geneva Learning Foundation's Dialogue for Learning and Leadership. And if you can tune in at 5 o'clock in the morning, I think it is for you, or listen to the recording later, you'll get to hear some of the feedback from our key contributors. Thank you so much, Peter. Very much appreciate your time. Grateful for your time. And good to have met you over at TechCrunch. Take care.